has a bachelor's degree in liberal arts from the University of Iowa and a master's degree from Methodist College. She's also a teacher with the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion and completed her 200-hour yoga teacher training. So welcome to our panelists this morning. We are going to get them all joining us here with their videos so you can see their wonderful faces. And we'll get started on our questions. I'm just going to give everybody a minute to get their video. Good morning, everyone. We're so happy you're here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah. Is there anything that you guys, before we kick off with the questions, is there anything that I missed in your bios or just a personal highlight that you'd like to share with the group before we open it up?
I'm just glad summer has begun for my kids, so they're out of school. So now we can all focus on what's, kind of our core goals.
All right. Yeah, I hear that. And the sun's out today, Polly. So that's a double win. All right. Well, thank you again for being here. Cammie may be popping in with individual questions as they come up. So we may go off script here a little bit, but will keep us on our toes. So as we open it up today, I'd like you to kind of expand on what we shared in your bio. Each of you shared a little bit about your experience holding a role within diversity and inclusion at your organizations. But can you tell me a little bit about how you personally lead those work supports and those practices within your organization and kind of your approach to that? This question is for all of you. So Polly, you're currently on the screen as being the last person to speak. So would you mind starting us out?
Sure. So how the organizational structure works for us in terms of inclusion and diversity is we do have a general director who oversees that immediate body of work, which includes the strategy, the strategic initiatives, project management. We have an intern on that team as well, and then we have kind of the ERG deployment. So my goal is to make sure that we are well aligned with what our business objectives are. We're partnering with the right people that we need to be, and we are focused at the right places in a community and a national level. So in all, I'd say we've got 2 core resources dedicated to that support, and I'm making sure that we've got the right oversight there.
Keellia, would you like to go next?
Sure. So our structure at Heartland as a large social service nonprofit, if there's people in the audience who aren't familiar with what we do. So the way that we're organized, so our team is small but mighty. So there's myself as a diversity officer, and then we have a diversity coordinator, Cornell Leffler, who some of you are familiar with. And I sit on senior leadership and report directly to John Janetta, who's our CEO. And so our values really center around trauma-informed care, which is really understanding people's whole complete story and making space for staff and clients to show up as they are. And so that really drives a lot of our initiatives, a lot of our planning. It's really integral into all of our strategies. But my role is to oversee a large number of different initiatives and goals and make sure that that D&I lens and that trauma-informed care lens is really applied to all of our work across the board. And Cornell mainly focuses on our 7 employee resource groups and meeting those goals and objectives as they grow and change every year.
Angela?
That means I'm next.
Yes.
Everyone. So at Mutual of Omaha, I'm entering my 5th year as the D&I leader. And gosh, I can't believe it's been that long, but when we started, the structure was significantly different than it is right now. So I'll just briefly say it was just me at the beginning. Now I have a team of 3. Dan Haar, who many of you know, leads our employee resource groups. We have 9 at Mutual of Omaha. Candy Jones is our career coach, and Andrew Roulard helps lead our culture shaping work. So in my role, I'm responsible not only for inclusion, equity, and diversity, but also culture shaping. And we have a very large culture shaping initiative at Mutual that requires all employees to go through a pretty significant training program and lots of reinforcement around our values, et cetera. We have also really leveraged from the beginning when it was just me. I really leveraged a lot of stakeholders across the organization. So we have a strong D&I council made up of about 20 people. And then we call it the DIAG. We love acronyms at Mutual. So it's the Diversity Inclusion Action Group, is made up of 5 executive leaders that help guide our strategy. So I really work with a variety of people across the organization.
Thank you so much. So for the folks that are joining us this morning, we know that their D&I journey, either as an individual or as someone leading the work within their organization, spans quite the spectrum, from just starting out, just trying to get some of those initiatives rolling and get some of that buy-in, all the way through advanced work like the 3 of you are hosting at your organizations. So we wanted to structure our conversation today is making sure that everyone that attended could walk away with something regardless of where they were at in their personal and professional journey. So we're going to structure today by starting out with how to get started and the things that we could do in the early stages, trying to get the ball rolling, if you will. So with our first question and thinking about the beginning, Angela, can you talk a little bit about change leadership? We know that's in the heart of DE&I work. So what strategies have you employed to accelerate that change and invite the support, like some of those stakeholders and advisory councils that you're hosting?
Yeah, absolutely. I am really passionate about change management. And I've had the good fortune to go through some certification around change management in my previous roles at Mutual. So I really am strategic about thinking, how are we going to usher in the cultural change that we need to? So I will say a couple of things that I have done in particular. I think the very first thing you need to do is get really clear yourself about the change imperative or the why, because you're going to ask that a lot. So really spend some time thinking about, why do we need to do this as an organization? How does it align with our values? How does it align with our business goals? What kind of data can I collect? Both, numerical data and qualitative stories from people that will really show why. Why now? Why is it important right now? Because people will always challenge, there's other priorities. You just need to think through what questions you're going to get. And I would even say build a deck with all your basic information around your core message, I guess I'll call it, that you can keep referring back to and keep using anytime you're out speaking to people. I think you should also think about, what specifically are you asking people to do differently through the change? And what will happen if you don't change? Really sit with it for a while and think about how well you understand what you're asking people to do. And then the other thing that I think is really important is thinking about the actual people and the stakeholders that you're going to be working with and where they are on their change journey. So in other words, how supportive are they of what you're doing? I've even seen something called a heat map that some people have put together, where you list out literally people's names and you code them, red, yellow, green. How supportive are they of this effort? People in influential positions. And then you sit and think about, what do I need to do to move those people forward? Now, guard that document with your life, right? Because you don't want it to get out. If you use that tactic, I think another way to do that really pretty easily, and I do think it's important to put this down on paper, list out the different groups and think about kind of where they are in terms of, is it that they aren't even aware that there needs to be a change, so they have a blind spot around it, or maybe they don't desire to support it, maybe they don't even want to help, or maybe they do, but they just don't know how. Maybe they're not sure what to do. And I think those things are really important to understand, because if you start out with training for people, yet you haven't even really built the desire for the work yet, you're not going to succeed. So people are going to show up with different kinds of resistance. And if you think about kind of what that might look like in advance, then you'll be much better prepared with a plan to really usher the change forward.
Thank you so much. I had to like grab my notepad because I was like, oh, I got to write all this down. I'm always learning something from you three. So thank you, Angela. Polly, can you talk about, this is something that I've asked you several times about ERGs. So each of you mentioned that you have ERGs within your organizations, but something I've talked to Polly quite a bit about is using those as a business resource and really leveraging them to support your overall business objectives. So Polly, can you spend some time describing how you do that at UP?
Absolutely, thank you, Amelis. So we have 9 employee resource groups. Our longest standing employee resource group is our Black Employee Network that will celebrate 41 years this year. It's hard to believe.
Wow.
So we had an awesome celebration in Chicago last year. Each of our employee resource groups has an executive sponsor, and that executive sponsor, I want to say majority, 7 of the 9 sit on senior staff, so they are a direct report to our CEO. Our executive sponsors ensure that the ERG goals, their focus really is aligned with the company business objectives. We've really seen a shift, certainly over those 40 years, going from an affinity group or network to a core business resource, which has been awesome to see. I would say the work is also guided by what we call an employee resource group steering committee. So that helps ensure that the ERGs are working collaboratively together. There's not overlap, duplicative work. So if I would highlight some of the kind of the core initiatives that we would say support that business resource work, the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm super excited about because we just announced this yesterday, is our LEAD, which is our women's network. And we had probably maybe about 1.5 years ago, we asked our women's organization to partner with our HR department, which is called Workforce Resources, to really enhance kind of our women in operating, help us increase overall representation, make that operating environment more inclusive. So just to help everybody kind of understand, we have roughly 35,000 employees. Majority of the employees are union. We've probably got just under 6,000 non-union employees. And as we look at overall representation in all in union and non-union, we're at 5.5% women. So we just announced yesterday, and this kind of goal setting was due in part to the work that our women's network did, kind of in partnership with a variety of folks, talent acquisition, the larger HR department. And so we announced that we plan in the next 10 years to double our overall female representation. So we're excited about that. That is not an easy focus or goal, if you will, because that means we need to be monitoring the attrition, right? And really be plugged in with all the departments that feed into that. So we're super excited about that. That was done with kind of some modeling work and forecasting with one of our lead co-chairs who has a financial background. So we were very appreciative of that. So this group will work with HR and the departments to identify, what are their frequently filled positions, make sure we're doing sourcing right, and we are really targeting a really broad group of individuals for these roles. So excited about that. And then we have our LGBTQ organization, which is called Bridges, that if you talk with them, they'll say, hey, we're supporting the company, supporting the business through a lot of policy. And so they were instrumental in getting us to participate in the Corporate Equality Index through the HRC, working with supply chain and HR to make sure that we were very inclusive in all of our programs, expanding beyond kind of minorities and and veterans, right, to make sure we're sourcing in all the right spots. And we've updated our community giving policy to make sure we have very specific kind of anti-discrimination language. We have done an overhaul in our benefits to make sure we have parity there. Domestic partners having same access to benefits. And then one of the fun initiatives we worked on about a year ago was gender transition guidelines, maybe even about a year and a half ago. And just making sure that people were going through the process had a resource that they could reference, they had contact information, and that sits internally online for people to access, so they understand how to have the conversation and people know what the proper guidance is around that. And then lastly, I'd focus, one of our more recent initiatives is what we call a rail relief program, excuse me, where we essentially solicit volunteers to go out into the field, be on call to support kind of our employees out there who are responding to maybe some of the natural disasters or uncertainties that happen to the railroad, where we might have need for additional people to be infused to support that work. So it really just aids our folks on the ground, our crews and managers, to make sure that they can respond in a crisis. So it's a good developmental exposure, and we have gone to our veterans ERG and our young professionals employee resource group. Kind of if we think about our military vets who are, you know, very well equipped, very comfortable in responding to, you know, natural disasters, who are used to being on call, and then our young professionals group called TIES, who really are passionate about volunteerism, if you will. So those are just 3 examples of how our employee resource groups are supporting the business. And the thing that I would say I've seen the big shift is our leadership at the senior team level has identified business initiatives that they would like our employee resource groups to lead. So it's very much a company is approaching our employee resource groups, and so we've been focused on propping them up, getting the ERGs the appropriate development so that they can take on some of that heavy lifting.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Polly. I think there's just so much potential with ERGs, and I think a lot of times they get stuck in a bit of a social realm, right? And just a connection and a networking. And, you know, when we hear experiences like what UP has managed, it should really inspire all of us that we can strive for so much more through the ERG format. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Keellia, as a nonprofit, you have a bit of a different experience than our 2 other panelists who experience life in a corporate setting. So as a nonprofit, how have you created a culture where D&I is just as important for not just your clients and the people that you're serving externally, but also internally for your employees?
Yeah, thanks, Amelis. It was interesting hearing Polly go through those examples, because I feel like there's so many similarities to what we're doing in aligning that connection from, you know, executive decision making. We just have different vocabulary around it, right? So just to put into context, Heartland has fewer than 500 employees. So I know, you know, Mutual is pretty big, and UP is giant. So we're not that large, right? But I want to affirm for people that strength doesn't come from, you know, super robust budgets. We've had years where we've had to make some significant cuts, and we've had years where ERG membership has maybe been, you know, 1 or 2 people coming consistently to meetings, and to let that ebb and flow be part of the way it works. And I know this happens if you have membership of 200 people or, you know, 15 people. There's always that ebb and flow. So for us, as far as external and internal, I think we're experiencing a lot of fruition, I think, in the last couple of years, because our ERG culture and that ERG strategy has been in place for I started 7 years ago, so I think it's been in place for at least 10 years. And we started with a women in leadership group. Heartland happens to maintain about 80% female identified staff. So we quickly were like, maybe we don't actually need a women's ERG. And so that split into one that is called LINK, Leaders in Culture. And that's our one that's really focused on race and identity. And then the other one that formed is called Family First, which is really around how do we balance career and caretaking, whether that's in foster, whether that's, you know, taking care of older parents, and not just with, you know, raising a family of your own. And I think we've been successful at leveraging our ERG because we do have a pretty tight, there's not a huge, I don't want to say this, there's not a really expansive tree of like executive levels and teams and things. We have a team, our executive leadership team has, I think, up to 12. And then there's our senior program managers and supervisors and staff. So there's not a huge distance to go. And our executive sponsors are super passionate about the groups that they work with. Sometimes that's through self-selection. Sometimes that's been through me seeing some natural connections and kind of reshuffling the deck as we need to. So some examples of how that's worked out internally, that Family First group being a nonprofit, one thing that we see consistently on our employee surveys is we don't make enough money. We don't make enough money. We have a lot of staff who have multiple jobs. We have a lot of staff who are single income earners for their home. And so our insurance was forcing people to choose between perhaps working for us or working for someone else, or perhaps not working and going back to Medicaid for their family to be able to provide for what they needed. And when our CFO, Amy Carolus, became the executive sponsor, she really heard that. And when you have that kind of transparent conversation, and your CFO is able to really take that to heart and start to ask some hard questions. What can we do better? Understanding that why, like Angela was mentioning with any kind of change, you know, we want people to be able to have a quality of life and to be able to give their skills and their talents to our clients and to our organization without feeling that scarcity and that fear of, I'm not going to be able to take care of my kid if something happens this month. So we took that to the CFO, and then our HR VP and our CFO worked really hard and shifted a whole bunch of things around. And we have now been able to offer for the last, at least the last 2 years, a zero cost insurance to our staff, which was like unheard of before that. We've also been working similarly to what Polly was saying with our PRISM group. Our PRISM ERG is our LGBTQIA group, and their executive sponsor is our Chief Development Officer. And so really looking at what do we do internally to grow the ability to meet queer folks with mental health, and knowing that we provide excellent care and that we have super strong legacy of training our staff, and that we have a gap there. And how do we leverage more training? How do we grow cohorts to be able to bring that trauma-informed care principles and the skills of our mental health and behavioral health therapists to the LGBTQ community? And if we do that, are we ready for them internally? Are we ready with our Documentation. Are we ready with our front desk staff? Do we have internally the capacity for a trans client who's still working with documents that reflect their dead name? And if they're in a waiting room, does our front staff know how to do that? So our PRISM leadership worked for about 18 months with our IT department, with our HR department. And that is something that took intelligence, and it took listening, and it took, you know, strategic application of time, but it did not take a lot of budget. It took those other things, you know? And now we have made just incredible leaps internally to create a more affirming workplace for staff that will increase our affirming care for clients. And that is a business impact.
Gosh, thank you so much for sharing that. I think though the three of you answered very distinct questions, I think I heard some collective themes about, you know, that relationship with your stakeholders, regardless of what title they have. There are key influencers within your organizations, either by role or just by connectedness, that can really make all the difference if you're able to leverage their influence for whether it be policy or culture change or ERG leadership. So I heard that collectively through your conversations. I love that there wasn't a huge focus on the money part of it, the money that you're pumping into the ERGs, but the voice, the advocacy, just those conversations, and how that's been a huge catalyst for each of you in the work that you're trying to do. So like Keellia said, no matter how small or big you are, you can do really great things. So I'm going to selfishly move to one of my the things that my ERG experience has gotten stuck on, and it's data. How do we measure if we're doing a good job or not? So Angela, would you mind kind of you talked earlier in your introduction about both quantitative and qualitative data in measuring performance and success. So how do you measure either in the past or currently with the success of your ERGs, or just IND in general?
Yeah. So we have, I'll just generally say we have a D&I scorecard that has several components where I do track numbers and share them often with our senior team on a regular basis. One of those things I really try to capture that I didn't at the beginning, so this has evolved, that just over the last year and a half, we've started looking at the impact ERGs are making. So we actually break down things like our engagement survey, and we say, if you're a member of an ERG, are you more engaged? And as a group, ERG members' engagement is higher than the general population. So that makes the case for your ERGs right there. Then we also started looking at things like, what about promotion rates? If you're in an ERG, are you moving? Are you developing? Essentially is what that's telling us. And that answer is yes also. And the last metric that we look at around that is retention. So are people staying longer? And that's also a yes. So those are three really great things that prove the value of your ERG. There's a couple of other things we do as well. So we do an annual ERG member survey. And one of the data points that I pull out of that survey is something we call the Erg Retention Factor. And we actually ask people, is the fact that we have an ERG or we have ERGs here a factor in your decision to continue working at Mutual? And in year one, I think we got like 20% of people said yes. But the difference per kind of ERG that they belong to was pretty significant. So the majority of people who answered the survey were from our women's ERG, and for them, it was much lower. For folks that were members of an ERG that had an identity based on cultural or ethnic or racial group, that was up into the 30 and 40 percentile. And for our LGBTQIA group, that was over 50% of people saying, yes, the fact that you have this ERG is a factor in my decision to work at this company. So we use those results and talk about them too. I think that's just as important as don't just look at your data, but use it to broadcast the value of your program. One other thing I'll talk about is Polly and Keellia are both very familiar with this conversation about how do we prompt ERGs to be more strategic and to really think about their value. So we've been in lots of sessions together and helped one another think through this. But one of the things that we've developed as a result of those conversations is called an impact scoring guide. And we give this to the ERGs as they're thinking through what activities do you want to do this year. So it's actually a numbered matrix, where at the bottom, the lowest scoring activities are social activities. They still get points, but they don't get as many points if you move up the scale and say, well, this activity actually is going to help with, say, recruiting, or this activity is going to help us identify a new market or a new product or a new way of connecting with our customers. And so we want to value still the cultural celebrations and the social networking aspect of the ERGs, but we're pushing them to do a little bit more. And so the higher their impact score is for one of their ideas, the more funding that they get for it. So those are a couple of ways that we measure the success of our ERGs.
Thanks, Angela. Now I want to do a quick pivot that isn't necessarily about where we're at on our DNI or ERG journeys, but more so where we're at kind of as a worldwide community, where right now we're living through a pandemic, and we're all in different phases of our response to that pandemic because of the people we serve or the businesses that we work in. So Polly, I'd like to get some thoughts from you on how your goals or your initiatives may have shifted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Have things stalled? Have they pushed forward?
Sure. Okay, thank you. So certainly early on in the year, we were very focused on our pandemic response, right? Instituting more rigorous sanitation, getting ourselves familiar and understanding social distancing protocols, keeping our employees safe and healthy by limiting those who are accessing the workplace. So once we saw that dust settled and we kind of gently got our workforce comfortable working from an alternate work location, which was not an office building, kind of folks who were maybe not necessarily or who physically had to report in, but they could accomplish their jobs while working remotely. We got them very settled in terms of having access to the appropriate systems, collaboration tools, checking in with them, surveying them. And I would say once that happened, we really started to see, at least I could see from management and leadership, people management level, there was this shift to inclusion. It was like a need and a desire to welcome people into their homes. So you saw videos being released, more frequent communications and updates saying, here's how I'm working today. Here's where I'm working, here are my children that are with me, here's how I typically spend a day. So really welcoming people into their homes to see how they live. And in my mind, that is really the epitome of inclusion, is letting people get to know you and understand where you're coming from, who supports you, and sharing those experiences. So I've been happy to see a lot of that. In terms of, if I were to summarize it, I would say there was that blip where it was that first 20, 30 days where it was, okay, we're focused on the COVID-19 response. Do we have everybody all settled in and focused and working on the right things? We were always continuing to do our D&I work. I would say it likely has been ratcheted up a level in terms of, okay, while we have this time to have dedicated focus, make sure that we don't miss a beat and we continue focusing on our goals. So one of the things we did pretty early on was ask our employee resource groups to develop some virtual programming to promote engagement. So we did see an uptick in some of those activities. There's been a lot more collaboration with our employee resource groups. We recently held a session focused around mindfulness. That was well received. We have done, of course, probably like everyone, virtual happy hours with our Council of Native American Heritage. We've done kind of a fry bread demo, if you will. We're communicating cultural heritage, celebrating our heritage months through newsletters. We have launched an employee resource group, a mentoring program. And then we've gotten out into the communities to kind of give food, be supportive in that regard. So as far as the overall initiatives, we think some of it is really making sure our communities are set right. Our board had approved additional dollars to support COVID-19 relief grants. And we have an internal organization called Friend to Friend, which all employees and their spouses and family are eligible for if they've had a home or dwelling disaster, suffering from medical issues, or just generally crisis. So the company has infused more dollars in there, which supports our employee base. From core strategy, we have we participated in the code pilot on the DE&I survey, and we recently had a debrief with our outside counsel on that. We have an action plan. We're ready to go with that. So I'd say we just continue to keep plugging along. We're just taking advantage of, while we might have some people who have their attention in a virtual state, we're pushing virtual training to them. We had some virtual unconscious bias and inclusive leadership training that was just rolled out computer-based way. So we see those completions really going up. And I would say once we know what the new normal is, we'll be well positioned, but we haven't missed a beat really with that, with the focus on inclusion and diversity.
Thank you so much, Polly. As we look at our time, we have about 15 minutes left in our discussion today, and we want to make sure that we leave enough time for our attendees to ask you guys some questions. So I'd like to go ahead and close out our conversation today with some final thoughts. So Keellia, and this will be for all three of you to answer, but I'm going to start with Keellia. What have you, if you could summarize in a quick elevator speech about what you've learned about yourself in doing this kind of work and how that's changed you as a leader, what would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me elevator speech it. Ask for more help than you ever think you need to, because nobody can do this alone, and you shouldn't do it alone. Share the microphone, pass the microphone, be the microphone when you need to. And I think data, and I'm glad Angela brought that up, data is always going to prove the good work that you're doing, and also the need for this work. So figuring out what you can measure and how you can measure it, and then, you know, shout that out, because that goes a long way. And then to be able to follow that up with stories. I think also just to understand, we're always going to be in learner mode, and to keep your heart open and also cared for. You know, it's so easy to get just completely blown out. And so that self-care piece is paramount to creating sustainability in yourself and with your organization.
Thank you, Keellia. Angela, same question. Elevator speech on what you've learned about yourself and how that's changed you as a leader.
Well, so much of what Keellia just said resonated with me. I think something in addition to that is I've learned to embrace my imperfections, and I'm a recovering perfectionist. I just have learned that I can't always expect to be successful, and I have to be okay with the parts of me that I'm not proud of, ugly tendencies that I have. I have to be willing to be vulnerable and share those things with people. I mean, this work we're doing, we're asking people to change how they see the world. And we're also asking them to step up and do things differently. So we have to be willing to do that first. And so I've really had to open up and share some things about myself that I'm not proud of, in an effort to get other people to see it's okay. You know, we have to admit where we are today if we're going to be able to move forward. So I think I've become more aware of emotions and more keyed in just to how I need to be an open-hearted and vulnerable leader, like Keellia talked about. And I think one last piece I'll say is I've also become bolder. So our experience at Mutual has not been quite the same as what Polly described. I would say we did kind of put D&I on the back burner when COVID hit us. And it was all about how are we going to keep the operations going. The mission critical work was really at the forefront, and I wasn't involved in a lot of conversations. And so I had to fight for a seat at the table. And I think one of the analogies that really helped me was thinking, you know, we're all going through the same storm here on the same ocean, but we have different boats. And some of us are in a yacht, and some of us are in a rowboat, and some of us don't even have an oar. And so I had to learn to get comfortable with pointing those things out and bringing those things to the forefront and saying, no, look, we need to pay attention to this. And so I've learned to get a little bit bolder with my voice and do that too.
Thanks, Angela. I love that analogy. I'm going to have to put that in my back pocket and save that for a good day, for a rainy day, if you will. Polly, last but not least, tell us, what have you learned about yourself in doing this work, and how has that changed you as a leader?
Somewhat eerily similar to what Angela had talked about and being a perfectionist, but I've held a lot of positions in my career, and I would say till I made the pit stop at D&I, I thought, yep, I'm enjoying this work. It's really good. I didn't realize I had such a passion for the work. Did it for about 2 years, and then I moved off of it. And when I knew I was supposed to leave that work behind, I was somewhat devastated. But then 3 months later, it came back to me as a part of my organization. So I was really pleased to see that. I love that the D&I advocates are so willing to open themselves up to others. They're willing to share what their experiences are, provide input, guidance, and counsel. And I found that with this group. I love that. Kind of in being that perfectionist, right? We've grown to accept we're going in asking for the moon and the stars because that's what we think we want and need right now. But I have learned to back off and be comfortable with any amount of progress. If I got more than what I went in with, then I have grown to accept that. Before, I would see it as a major disappointment and loss if I didn't get exactly what it was that I wanted. So I've learned to compromise and be comfortable with that compromise. One of the things is you know, a lot of us are and have been teams of one or 1.5. And so what you find in doing that work is that you get to wear a ton of different hats. I've talked to a lot of the D&I folks, and in most cases, you know, we're advocates, we're strategists, we're politicians, right? It's a very political environment that you navigate in, and project managers and a master collaborator. So the biggest thing for me is just making sure that I am intentionally focused to make sure everybody's viewpoints are heard in scenarios and situations I find myself in.
Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you all. So we do have a few questions to go in, but I'll let you wrap up before we go into those questions, Amelis.
Oh, nope. I was just going to thank them for their time, and that I'm constantly learning from these three. So I hope that our participants did the same. And a lot of those same themes that we kind of heard even in the closing: be bold, use your voice, and be okay with a little bit of progress. So it's a journey, and you got to keep stepping forward. So Cammie, let's hear those questions.
All right, the first one we have two. The first was that a few of you did mention your ERG supported policy. So do any ERGs support employee compliance / discipline issues, restorative practices for policy violations?
So I can answer that. My quick answer is no. We have a company corporate investigations team that handles that. But what you do see, especially with our folks in the field, because we're in 23 different states, employees in the field will reach out to someone they feel comfortable with at the employee resource group level. And in fact, I know one in particular has an inbox where you can send issues, concerns. And so you'll see that some of those funnel in that way. And I would say over my time, I might have seen 2 that were forwarded to me that way. So it's always, we're here for you. We can support you in any way, let us know. But we have a formal kind of complaint process, which people do use.
We're the same. We keep it very separate, but there's that that reach out to people that are trusted on the ERG teams.
I agree. Ours would be more influencing policy on the front end versus responding when things come through. Although there have been times where I picked up the phone and called a president of an ERG and said, help me think through this. I'm not sure what to do.
Thank you. So the next question is, how has, and this came from our friend Peter, how has Omaha as a location been a challenge and or advantage in driving a diversity and inclusion agenda?
I can say 2 quick things. One advantage first is that I think we are a small enough community that we can be well connected and really support one another. So I recognize almost all the names of the attendees on this call. Keellia and Polly, I both consider dear friends, as do I most of the other D&I leaders in the community. I know almost everyone, and they're all so willing to help. And that is, I think we take that for granted. That is not the case everywhere. I think we can really influence change together. One of the challenges is talent. I mean, there are stereotypes about Nebraska and Omaha, and there are also realities about our location that make it difficult to recruit diverse talent and help people understand that we really are a hidden gem, that we want people to come here who haven't grown up here. So we've really struggled in terms of recruiting. That's one of the challenges I've seen.
Yeah, so just real quick, I would say, we know as an employer, we have our goals and what we need to focus on to attract that diverse talent. There's also that community responsibility, right? There's the role I play at my organization, but then there's that role that I need to play in the community with my neighbor to be welcoming and to embrace them. So I would just put a plug in for just a campaign that we're launching with KETV to talk about an inclusive city. How can we be more inclusive? How can we attract and retain the talent and encourage young people to get involved in the community and for people to be really good neighbors, right? And talking about some of the policy and access. So we know we can always do better, but I love where we're at today as I think about the code initiative. I think about the LeadDIVERSITY program. The applications are opening up. We can give other people access to this knowledge and this cohort that we have ourselves. So I'm excited about our future.
I think that's just to echo quickly, I think Omaha has this unique connectedness, and I feel like we have a spirit that's very willing to collaborate, and I've appreciated learning so much from other people doing this work. I think we also have that niceness, like that Midwest niceness that sometimes prevents us from asking hard questions, from some of that boldness, because it's just not in our bones. And I think that is shifting, and I think we are making really good strides to boldness that is not steeped in, it's coming from an invitational space, right? And looking to make change so that we raise everyone's boats, so that everyone's coming up. And so that's been my experience, I think.
Yeah. So we've got one last question from David, which is, what if your organization only has 40 employees. Do you recommend setting up ERGs?
I'd say for us, I see that as a grassroots driven organization. So if the employees have expressed there's a need for them to want to get together and promote and foster engagement in certain ways, then I would definitely lean into that and be open. But I think if the employees want it, make it happen. If it's good for one or two, then it's beneficial.
I think too, I've seen in some of our smaller locations where we've had an ERG just start around inclusion, and they rotate their discussions and their topics to include a whole variety of issues that different communities face. So you can even start, I've heard, you know, things like a brown bag lunch where people bring food that's meaningful to their culture and talk about it. You know, so there are some simple things you can do too without starting an ERG.
Yeah, and it can be, don't get hung up on that title or that the formality of the employee resource group. It can be a council, it can be, you know, your team. You can name it what makes sense to you and what empowers you to get to that why, and what is it that we want to start working on. Why are people wanting to gather together? Where are the gaps that they want to address?
Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our final slide here. Thank you to our panelists and presenters today, Amelis, Polly, and Angela and Keellia. Also, I want to just do a quick thank you of our LeadDIVERSITY sponsors. Without them, this program would not at all be possible. And those companies are OPPD, First National Bank, Peter Kiewit Foundation, and the Mutual of Omaha. Lastly, I just want to do another reminder that the applications for LeadDIVERSITY are open till June 5th. You can apply at our website, which is listed there. If you have any questions for me or any of these lovely folks, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with it. We have recorded this session, so we will have it available on the Inclusive Communities YouTube page for folks to go and watch at another time. But we thank you all again for your time, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.